Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for coming out on this rainy day. Welcome to the Black Angels book launch and discussion presented by the Staten Island Museum. I'm Janice Monger, President and CEO of the Staten Island Museum. We are delighted to hold this program today to celebrate the release of The Black Angels, The Untold Story of the Nurses Who Helped Cure Tuberculosis by Maria Smilios. And it's published by Putnam. It's thrilling to see the tremendous response to this story. The size of this audience is a testament to the excitement in our community for bringing this history to light and the support for Virginia Allen, who has been telling her remarkable Virginia has been telling her remarkable personal story as a nurse at Seaview Hospital in forums throughout the community for decades. This much-anticipated book will bring the broader national attention this history deserves. Welcome to all of you. We are joined here today by many community leaders and members. I want to acknowledge former Councilwoman Debbie Rose, and Public Administrator Edwina Francis Martin. Thank you to the museum trustees in attendance and members. And thank you. And I'd especially like to thank the College of Staten Island for stepping up to offer their biggest theater to accommodate the demand for this event. We appreciate CSI's support and partnership. It is notable that we are joined this afternoon in the audience by Curleen Bennett, who Curleen worked as a nurse at Seaview from 1957 to 1958, and there are many family members and descendants of the Black Angels here today. I want to especially greet you and thank you for being here as we honor these nurses' legacy. This history has inspired the nursing leaders of today, many of whom are here as well, and we're honored to be joined by leaders from the New York State Nurses Association and the New Jersey State Nurses Association. We are grateful for every nurse's service, so thank you all for being here. We are grateful to Maria for recognizing the significance of the Black Angels' history and the tuberculosis treatment at Seaview Hospital. It is meaningful that she chose to hold one of the first events for this book release right here in the community in which this story takes place. So thank you, Maria, and thank you all for being here to learn more and reflect on this groundbreaking history. While Maria's book was being completed, over the past few years, the Staten Island Museum has also been busy working to document and preserve this history. So we've conducted a full audio and video oral history with Virginia Allen and also Curleen Bennett, and we've presented an online exhibition curated by Gabriella Leone. Thank you. I'm pleased to share with you that the Staten Island Museum will present a new major exhibition highlighting the groundbreaking work, lives, and legacy of the Black Angels. This exhibition, Taking Care, The Black Angels of Seaview Hospital, curated by Riley Ederginoso and Gabriella Leone, will open to the public on January 27th, 2024 at the Staten Island Museum. The exhibition will present the nurses' portraits and interviews, historic artifacts and photos, and will feature a meditative film and video installation by contemporary artists Elisa Blunt Moorhead and Bradford Young. Thank you to the Andy Warhol Foundation for the Visual Arts, for major exhibition support, and always to the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs for program support for the museum. So this event really kicks off the lead up to that exhibition, and today you will hear from Maria Smilios, Black Angels nurse Virginia Allen, and public historian Debbie Ann Paige, and we're So we're grateful for the involvement of each of today's panelists in the development of the exhibition as well. Our moderator today is Gabriella Leone, our fantastic History Archives Manager for Staten Island Museum, public historian, and co-curator of the exhibition. Please enjoy today's program. And now I want to invite to the stage Deacon Bernice Meadows Aline to sing Blessed Assurance, which was a favorite hymn of Black Angel nurse Missouri Meadows Walker, Bernice's late great-aunt.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
Trying to find a song that I heard my aunt used to hum in the kitchen, and I was watching a movie by Cicely Tyson. She was singing this song, and I said, "Oh, I remember that song." So I chose that particular song because it reminded me of her. Blessed assurance, Jesus is mine. Oh, what a foretaste of glory divine, heir of salvation, purchase of God, born of the Spirit, washed in His blood. This is my story. This is her song, praising her Savior all the day long. This is her story. This is her song, praising her Savior all the day long. This is her story. This is her song, praising her Savior all the day long. This is her story. This is her song, praising her Savior, praising her Savior all the day long.
Very.
That was beautiful. Another round of applause for Bernice. Good afternoon, esteemed colleagues and guests. I'm Gabriella Leone, Archives Manager at the Staten Island Museum, and it's an honor to moderate today's discussion and to be a part of this important day for Staten Island history. I've been thrilled to work with all three of today's panelists to document and amplify the story of the Black Angels and the institution of Seaview Hospital. And it's my pleasure to welcome Maria Smilios, Debbie Ann Paige, and Virginia Allen today. Maria Smilios is the author of The Black Angels, the untold story of the nurses who helped cure tuberculosis. Maria is from Astoria, Queens. She holds a Master's of Arts from Boston University in Religion and Literature, where she was a Henry Luce Scholar and a Presidential Scholar. She formerly worked as a development editor in the biomedical sciences, and it was during this time when she read a line in a book that led her to the story of the Black Angels. Through writing the book, she's become an advocate for affordable and accessible TB drugs throughout the world, supporting organizations such as End TB and Partners in Health. Maria and I met about 5 years ago, and we've been talking about and planning this day since then. I'm excited to be here celebrating this great success with her. Once we began planning this event, Maria expressed that she wanted to be in conversation with two people she consulted often and who contributed greatly to the book. Virginia Allen and Debbie Ann Paige. Of course, they are two of my favorite people, so it's a pleasure to introduce them now. Virginia Allen was born in Pennsylvania and grew up in Detroit, Michigan. When she was 16, she moved to Staten Island to live with her mother's sister, Edna Sutton Ballard. That was only about 20 years ago, who was a registered nurse at Seaview Hospital. Inspired by her aunt Edna, Virginia took a job as a nurse's aide in the Children's Hospital at Seaview. While working there, she studied nursing at the Central School for Practical Nurses, and she worked at Seaview from 1947 to 1957. Later, she went on to work as a private duty nurse, a surgical nurse, and eventually a personnel training director at Brooklyn Jewish Hospital. She then began a career in labor relations with Local 1199, the United Healthcare Workers. And she's a member of the NAACP, the National Council of Negro Women, Lambda Kappa Mu Sorority, and the Unitarian Church of Staten Island. Debbie Ann Paige is a public historian specializing in African American history on Staten Island. She is a professional genealogist and co-president of the Richard B. Dickinson Staten Island chapter of the Afro-American Historical and Genealogical Society. She is currently pursuing her doctorate of education in community-based leadership at the College of Staten Island. And she's worked on numerous history projects, including In Pursuit of Freedom with the Brooklyn Historical Society, Women of the Nation Arise and From Farm to City with the Staten Island Museum, and the designation of the Louis Napoleon House as a site to freedom with the National Park Service Underground Railroad Network on behalf of the Sandy Ground Historical Society. Thank you all for joining us today, and with that, I will invite Maria Smilios up to read a passage from her book.
Thank you, Gabriella. Thank you, everyone, for being here, especially in this weather. I'm honored and humbled to be here after 8 years. There are so many people who made this book a reality, and I will thank them later and ask them to stand. But for the moment, I want to turn to this story. For those who don't know, I'll give you a brief overview of what this story is about. In 1929, white nurses, for various reasons, began leaving Seaview Hospital. The city, wanting to avoid a public health crisis, called up Black nurses who lived in the Jim Crow South, and because of Jim Crow, had been barred from working because the country that drew lines around water fountains and waiting rooms also drew lines around hospitals. The city promised them good pay, housing, and schooling. And so these women, wanting freedom and a professional career, came north to Seaview to risk their lives and work in a place known as, quote, the pest house, with the, quote, incorrigible consumptives on wards teeming with live bacteria. For those who think tuberculosis is only a disease of the lungs, it's not. It's a grievous disease that eats away at the body in alarming ways, and it takes a long time to die. The microbe is beautifully designed to torture and ensure that people suffer. And so picture this. For those who don't know Seaview, it's up in Toad Hill, is that where? Okay. It's close by. It's 400 feet above sea level, isolated. At the time, there was no Verrazano Bridge, so the only way you could get here was by ferry. Seaview Hospital had open wards. There were supposed to be only 30 beds, but it was overcrowded, so there were beds coming down the middle. And these were the conditions that the nurses worked in. They went on to these open wards and took care of these patients day in and day out. Tuberculosis nursing is considered a boring job because they do the same thing all the time. But it is also a job that is mentally, physically, and emotionally demanding. And so the passage I'm going to read now from the book is about Missoria Lavina Meadows Walker, Bunny's Pont. Early morning broke over Staten Island, and the light outside slipped from black to blue to a fiery orange. It blanketed the sky above the city and the harbor and rolled up the hill, falling through the windows of Seaview in slats, and extending itself onto the nightstands and beds of Ward 64. Newcomer, Missouri Lavinia Meadows Walker, stood beside her nurse's cart, her hands busy dipping a cloth into a basin of warm water positioned next to a straight razor and a cup of fresh shaving lather. She wrung out the cloth, set it aside, and turned to her patient, Albert K., a 44-year-old former subway worker from Brooklyn. "Good morning," she said, and drew him forward, slipping a pillow behind his neck and another behind his head in preparation for his morning shave. He muttered a word strung together with only consonants. Years of being sick had wasted his muscles and turned his arms and legs into mere appendages that served little purpose. Mr. Albert, as he was called, could no longer stand or walk or even lift a spoon. Now he spent his days in bed with his lips pursed in an expression of reproach, as if to say, "It is all your fault that I'm here." Before starting, Missouri reached into her pocket, pulled out a mint, and placed it in her mouth. It was a habit she had acquired many years before, along with wearing a copper bracelet on her wrist to ward off illness. Sliding the mint between her cheek and upper gum, she lifted the warm, wet cloth from her cart and moved close to the bony face with its tight lips. She began patting it with a towel, softening the gray and white stubble that poked out like tiny thorns. Dropping the cloth onto the tray, she lifted the shaving brush from the cup of lather. In gentle swirling motions, she coated Mr. Albert's chin. He winced and clenched his teeth and let out a long, muffled snarl. Missouri regarded the gesture and moved the brush slower until his face was covered in soft white foam. Then she took the straight razor and placed it beneath his ear. The blade sank into the cream and she pulled downward, gently scraping the skin and slicing off the coarse nubs of stubble. Damn it, Mr. Albert cried out, launching into his daily ritual of cursing, directed at Seaview, at the disease, at his ward mates, and at the nurses who shaved and changed and bathed him. Missouri kept working, focusing on keeping her hands steady. It was a task that needed to be done, even though he loathed it. Shaving and bathing and using the bathroom were once intimate, private acts, routines done to start the day. But here at Seaview, these had become public spectacles, performed by a nurse as part of her everyday duties. Although Missouri took her time, it provided little comfort to the formerly self-sufficient men like Albert. To them, a nurse wielding a razor or washcloth or bedpan was a humiliating reminder of how much their life had devolved, of their helplessness, and of the disease that had no cure. Sure, the baths and haircuts and manicures felt good, but many men saw them as formalities, done to keep up the appearance of normalcy, to pretend sickness could be conquered with clean nails, neat hair, or a smooth face. For Mr. Albert, all they did was drive home his isolation, the reality that if Missouri did not clean him, no one would. In the 3 months since she'd started working on the ward, not a single person had visited him. On his nightstand, beside the sputum cup, an enamel water pitcher, there were no photographs. During her rounds, Missouri, with her deep-set eyes that people said could track a fly, often looked at the snapshots posed on the small nightstands separating the beds. Some showed families gathered at a picnic or around a table set with food. Some were of a single woman, a mother, a sister, perhaps a girlfriend. Others had professional photos of their wedding day.
That was a really powerful passage. I remembered when I read the book. It really stuck out. And so I wondered why you chose to read it.
I want you to read this. Is it rain? I wanted to read this passage because I thought it was important for people to understand two things. One, that the work the nurses did was not only mental and emotional, but it was physical labor, and often
patients they took care of, like Mr. Albert, were not necessarily angry at them. They were angry at the disease, but the nurses had to emotionally keep themselves composed and keep doing this job. I mean, it happens today, you're saying. The second reason I wanted this, so let me rewind. This is a book that is a lot about labor, the emotional and, again, mental labor that these Black women had to endure. But it is also a book about patience. And we often forget that people, or we don't know that people who suffer from tuberculosis, like Mr. Albert, I looked at the medical cards and people spent 400, 800, 1,000 straight days at Seaview. One person said to me, the wards of Seaview were the great equalizers. If you wanted privacy, you were not going to find it there. And so I thought that this passage illustrated so powerfully both the work the nurses did and the patients who were suffering. And nothing, it didn't matter how clean they got. You know, their dignity had been lost.
And so we have, luckily we have with us on stage someone who worked at Seaview, who experienced that labor and what it was like to care for patients at Seaview. So I was wondering, Virginia, if you could tell us what a day was like. You worked at the Children's Hospital on Seaview. What was it like a day in your job as a nurse?
I would like to preface my remarks by paying tribute to two important women in my life, my mother, Ruth, and my aunt, Edna Sutton Ballard, who is mentioned in this book. They will always be with me in spirit. Maria, I would like to thank you for your perseverance and all the research in getting this book written. I was very impressed with your hard work in history, especially. For example, your research in Savannah, when you were writing about my family, finding newspaper articles about my Aunt Edna, who had such a lovely singing voice, and her grandfather, who was a preacher. Being able to see the family home in Savannah was very thrilling. And it was also satisfying to know that they were living decently during those times. I wish you much success on the publication of this book, The Black Angels, which describes the part that nurses played in making the cure for tuberculosis a success. Now to answer your question, Gabriella. One day in the life of a child in Seaview Hospital, I loved my job. It was like an adventure, always something new and different every day, and yet in many ways the same. I will try to recall the activities of daily living. There were about 30 patients on the ward. At first, I would make rounds and speak to every child. They were all waiting eagerly for the morning to begin. Breakfast would arrive, and necessary, we would feed them. We bathed the children and groomed them their hair every day. School was located on the ward for the older children and off the ward for the older children and on the ward for the younger ones. After school, those who needed it got help with their homework, were read to and taken out to the solarium for the day. If they were bedridden, we would move the beds out to the solarium, making sure they were dressed appropriately for the weather At that time, the plan was to get fresh air, rest, and good, wholesome, rich food. This was their diet and therapy for the restoration of health. Some of the children were sicker than others, so their care had to be adjusted. During visiting hours, if there were no visitors for some patients, the staff would keep them company. The children were occupied most of the day with those activities of their occupational therapy and physical therapy. And looking back at the experience, it was like caring for them as a patient, but it was fun, and I enjoyed my work tremendously. You became very closely bonded to the patient.
Thank you, Virginia. And the solarium you're talking about is a porch sort of around.
Yes, you could open the windows, and every ward had a solarium.
And then Debbie, just from a broader consideration, how does the experience of yours at CPP Hospital sort of illustrate the traditional role, the historical role of Black women and as caregivers, for better or worse, right? By choice or because they were relegated to that role?
Ooh, thank you for the question. Well, one, let me just say thank you for allowing me to be here. I really am honored and humbled. And just in consideration of Black women or women of the African diaspora as caregivers, there is this African tradition that I'm going to set aside for a moment and just kind of focus on what it looks like in the United States. So the labor, as Marie alludes to, of Black women or women of the African diaspora has been stolen and unpaid. It begins in enslavement, where they're forced to care for others and not allowed to care for their own. Just imagine for a minute that it's January 1st, and you know what they call the weeping times, when sales of bodies, Black bodies, are about to happen to settle debts, to pay for, whatever mishaps have happened on plantations or these work farms, and a mother is sold, and a 4-year-old boy is left standing. What happens? What happens is that usually the women who are left behind, who are fortunate enough not to be sold, will step in and take up that little boy and sassoon that child into the family. It's one of the things that we find difficult in tracing African American family history. So we no longer look just for bloodlines, we look for family connections, because that's what it has to be. Moving forward from that, Black women, whether they want to or not, have always stepped in to take care of communities. So even as I consider myself, the work that I do, I consider that taking care of my community, giving back to my community the history that they may not know even exists. And the community is community at large. Looking at ourselves introspectively, I think that it's important to understand who we are and where we come from. And we tend to do that, to be nurturing and to look to help our communities. But even extended past that, as we move into, say, the late 19th century, early 20th century, we're looking at Black women being undervalued and underpaid based on their past nurturing of the Black community. And so we find ourselves where even today, Black women are still underpaid more so than any other groups of people.
I just want to add that when the nurses were promised good pay and housing and education, their pay was always less than white nurses. They encountered racism at CBU. There's a story in my book that I tell when the new dining room opened, and they walked in, and on some tables they saw little placards that said whites only. So when they came up here, it wasn't as if they came and everything was fantastic. The city only allowed Black nurses to work in 4 of its 26 municipal hospitals. And the commissioner of health was a horrible racist who these nurses actually helped to take down, and he eventually retired. But it wasn't until 1940 that Mayor LaGuardia desegregated all of the hospitals and opened them up to Black nurses. And so this is not so long ago. I mean, there's still systemic racism and health inequalities that we see, but I just wanted to point out that when they came up, it was not, all cotton candy and balloons for that.
And some of the nurses, were involved in activism on the island, right? Did you talk about that a little bit?
So in addition to taking care of people, many of these nurses were also working against redlining. They were working against institutional racism. They were, for example, one nurse tells the story, I heard this over and over again, when they come from Harlem and come off of the ferry to get the 111 bus, people who got on the bus would stare at them or step away from them, and it wasn't just because of the color of their skin. They believed they were contaminated. That was every move. The TB bacteria was sprung left and right. And so imagine coming to take care of people, and the people at CU, I should just say, were also on the fringes of society. These were people that the city considered second class. They were mostly immigrants, African Americans. They lived dominantly in the Lower East Side. They were stigmatized. They were ostracized from their communities. Virginia could talk a little bit about the children who were orphaned there because their families either couldn't take them back because they would be stigmatized and they would lose their jobs. Imagine coming to America to find a better life, and what you find is tuberculosis and a hospital that's woefully understaffed. And the only people willing to take care of you are these Black women who have been barred from becoming professionals unless they choose to risk their lives. And so in addition to doing this type of labor, they were also advocating for equal pay, to buy homes in the community, and to just be able to go to work and walk into a dining room without a little tiny placard saying whites only.
So CDU was sort of a space of marginalization for both people there, right? Both Asians and nurses. And you started to talk about who the patients were at CDU, who Mr. Albert represents in the book. Well, what was his story, or how is he representative of the patients there?
So most of the patients that went to CDU, it was municipal hospital, so it was free, were sent over when the city decided to establish CDU, which goes back to the turn of the century, when the then medical director of New York City, Herman Biggs, who had good intentions, but the execution was bad. And we see that a lot, right? The city wanted to get rid of tuberculosis. And so he called together the city and he said, tuberculosis is killing 10,000 people a year. We got to do something. And so he gave them this economics of human life because, it's always about money. And he said, these people are sick and costing us a lot of money. Let's build a hospital to quarantine that. And so they built CBU, and they called that, incredulous consumptives. They blamed that for making people sick. And that is why tuberculosis is often, seen as a disease of poor people, of people because they're poor, they're dirty, they're uncultured, which is not true.
at all. Tuberculosis is an airborne virus. And when you have 80,000 buildings in the Lower East Side housing 2 million people with no windows, people are going to get sick. And so the people that went there were laborers. They were the ones who basically built the city. And they were African Americans who had migrated from the South and were living in Harlem, where about two of the athletes slipped my mind, who said, this is dissenting Bowery up here. So those were the types of cadence that CVU had.
Great. And Virginia, what was your experience of the patients in the children's ward? Where were they from, or their family situation played?
I found that it covered all races, and they weren't all poor. There were a few people there, children there, whose parents had money, but it was a mixture.
Mm-hmm.
Do you go ahead, Devin?
I just wanted to say also that in terms of where we think fingerprint, oftentimes we have a specific picture in mind. But we should also remember that during this time, that during this Great Migration, they're not just coming from the United States South. They're actually coming from the Caribbean islands as well. And so as they, some may actually have found it familiar to see the Black nurses there, just, as opposed to just, seeing someone who was foreign to them, they may have found comfort in seeing these faces. I myself, when I came here, I had never seen white people like that before. And so as I moved through and found people of color, it gave me comfort. And I think maybe they have found some comfort in that too.
You referred to the idea of incorrigible in some digs. That's the idea that having tuberculosis kids is due to some personal moral failing, right? Or some, rather than just being exposed to someone who also has tuberculosis.
Earlier this week, I had the incredible opportunity to sit on a panel that was part of the United Nations met this week for the high-level tuberculosis reading to try and get affordable drugs to TB-heavy burden countries. And I had the wonderful privilege of sitting in one panel with a woman who wrote a book called Stigmatized. She was from Mongolia. And 10 years ago, she contracted tuberculosis. And she told this incredibly powerful story of when she was diagnosed, her doctor said, don't tell anybody. And her family said, you can't talk about this. And they put her away in a sanatorium, very, very much like Seaview, and tried to keep it a secret because she was going to be unmarriageable. Because people were going to ostracize her. And she told this story, and this is happening now in countries like Mongolia. And to hear her, there was another woman from India, a journalist, whose life was threatened because she writes about tuberculosis, and they want to pretend it doesn't exist. So this is very real. It's happening now. And so it hasn't really changed in many countries. If you tell somebody here that you've had tuberculosis, I guarantee you they're going to be like, first of all, what? Because we think it doesn't exist. Second of all, they'll probably be aware because they know enough that it's an airborne virus. And so I just wanted to say that. But to add to Debbie, I had the wonderful, I was fortunate to track down 2 patients who were part of the original trials. One was a part of their community named evangelist. You might know her as Mimi Brer, who unfortunately passed away. You could not see the light day. This book come to the light that day. But she recalled being Seaview and almost dying. And she recalled that it was the Black nurses that kept her alive. She said, I was in these fever dreams, and I remember opening my eyes, and they would be once sitting there reading for me. And there's another one whose family is here, Walbase Delabas, also unfortunately passed away, but she too remembered the Black nurses, keeping her alive. So speak to Debbie's point, these nurses were loved by their patients. There were some that didn't.
So it's a hard job, sounds like, right? And your face, so nurses at CDU are facing this sort of dangerous pathogen. They're facing racism. They're facing all kinds of challenges in their personal lives, their professional lives. And so they rely, Debbie, on a community within CDU and outside CDU in order to keep doing their jobs. Will you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so thank you. Community is it's everything, right? It's church, it's these civic organizations, it's these social organizations, and the nurses found these spaces to be able to provide comfort and networking for each other, as well as the community at large. So if they're members of the NAACP, they're showing up in huge numbers, and they're pushing the agenda of the NAACP in order to secure their neighborhoods. If you are part of NCNW, you're doing the same thing. If you're Lambda Kappa Mu, you're doing the same thing. You're gathering money, you're gathering people, spaces, times, and you're keeping your community safe. You are supporting your community, and you're supporting each other. When you go to church, you see each other at church, and you are worshiping together. You are singing the songs of blessed assurance together. You are comforting one another at church. You would go out into the community and find, if you're doing rent parties, right? So there's this thing where we do rent parties. If someone falls short, we're going to come together as a community, and we're going to party together, and we're going to support each other through doing these kinds of things. And so the community benefits hugely from these women who are moving through together, making the community more solid.
And what does that mean in terms of research specific, in terms of sources, in terms of, just to follow up on what you're saying?
So for myself, as I do history, one of the first places I go to is the newspapers, right? Because that's where people would see and hear each other. Whether it's true or not, whether what they're saying in the newspapers are true or not, it's what would have happened during that time. And I do very specific searches in how I try to find the individuals. And as I put those things down, for example, if I'm looking for 19th century or early 20th century, there's a vernacular that you use towards and about Black people. I wouldn't search for the African diaspora. I may search for colored or Negro. And when you put those things together and those things start to pop up, then you follow the rabbit hole, is what I call it. And there are numerous rabbit holes that will keep you up till 3 o'clock in the morning. Oops, did I say that out loud? I'm sorry. But because it becomes so fascinating and it's becomes so revealing, as a person who is an immigrant, who comes to the United States as a child, who has parents who don't know about African American history, I wasn't taught anything. I grew up in Staten Island, and my teachers didn't share those things with me as well. So the questions that I ask have to be different. So I'm always asking, well, I show up somewhere, I'm the Black person in the room, where are the Black people? And so those are the kinds of questions that you ask in order to find the information that tells these stories.
You want to add anything, Marie? Recent or?
The story of the nurses was, there were no outcasts. Nobody cared about this story. The story of CDU is a well-known TV community. It's a male-centered narrative. I'm not going to take away the contributions of Dr. Robichek because his son, who is not here today, he doesn't travel, was also vital to helping to tell the story. Dr. Robichek is from Lublin, and from what I've heard from the patients and the nurses, and Virginia can speak to that a little bit. he was a fair man, but the accolades come on him because most narratives that were, in most science, a lot of them are male-centered. And when I first stumbled upon this story, I was like, wow, here's another story of women, of Black women in science that has been, their contributions are completely ignored. And so because there were no archives, I had to tell this whole history. It really was piece by piece, and it was in many ways a labor of love. It took this entire community and so many people in this room and who are not here, and people who have passed since I started this way back 8 years ago. And I stitched it together. It's like, making a giant quilt. It really was thread by thread by thread. And I harassed people for years in text messages. What color nail polish did your aunt wear? What did her voice sound like? Did she wear flat shoes or high heels? Did she wear hats or no hats? Did she like the cold or hate the cold? And everybody answered. They answered me. And this story belongs to them. It's their voices in the book, and I feel grateful to have been able to bring it together into a cohesive narrative. I love it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, I agree with you that the problem with archives, right, is, or formal archives, that they have historically had these gaps in their collections about histories of African-American women, of people of color, of people at the margins of society. But I think what you're saying in that the archive lives with Virginia Allen, and it lives with the families who are with us together. And so we've been excited to talk to Virginia Allen, to Curleen, to the family here today, to sort of rectify that, to let it know. And so I'm going to just ask the final question to the panel where I've been it up to audience Q&A. And it's a simple question, but I think it has a lot of potential answers. And that's just, what do you hope people take away from this story? I'm going to start with Virginia.
I would, excuse me, I would like to dedicate these words that I'm going to speak to our ancestors who worked at Seaview. It's called We Remember Them by Sylvan Kamens and Rabbi Jack Brimmer. At the rising sun and at the going down, we remember them. At the blowing of the wind and in the chill of winter, we remember them. At the opening of the buds and in the rebirth of spring, we remember them. At the blueness of the skies and in the warmth of summer, we remember them. At the rustling of the leaves and in the beauty of the autumn, we remember them. As long as we live, they too will live, for they are now a part of us as we remember them. When we are weary and in need of strength, we remember them. When we are lost and sick at heart, we remember them. When we have decisions that are difficult to make, we remember them. When we have joy we crave to share, we remember them. When we have achievements that are based on theirs, we remember them. For as long as we live, they too will live, for they are now a part of us. We remember them.
And Virginia, thank you for being such a tremendous ambassador for this story. In our community, we value you. And I think those words really indicate the role that you played in making sure this story is told and contributing to the library here today.
Yes, continue.
It really is. Yes. How is that? You
Think we're in Sway.
I think in the remembrance, in the understanding of the history, we tend to tell the history of the United States from a white male-centered perspective. I'd like us to take a step back. Every time we look at these kinds of stories, take a step back and situate Black people in it. I always tell people from the beginning of Staten Island's colonizing, of the 6 people who come to colonize and settle the island, there's a person of color, there's an African who's here alongside them. And that from that moment in 1640 up until 2023, people of color, Africans or people of African descent more specifically, have been here. And I want everyone to to consider that every time you think about the history of Staten Island.
I hope that ultimately what people take away from this story is that it's a very human story. It's one of hope. And it's one that shows us that in times of need, there are always people who are willing to risk their lives to take care of us. Virginia always said to me, we are all we have. Yes. You and I. And if we don't take care of each other, no one else will. And I think, reflecting on this book, that's what the Black Angels did. They took care of people, and in doing so, they saved tens of millions of lives, and they changed the course of history.
Yeah.
So I hope people take away that triumphant part of the story, because it's important, because it's the truth. We are all we have. And before I close, I just want to say a few words. Books are not made in vacuums. There are so many people here that were responsible for this book seeing the light of day. First, I just want to thank my team of people, my agent Larry, he's not here, but my editor Michelle and my publicist Nicole are back here, and a team that's around Dallas. I want to thank my family, my daughter Grace, my husband, and all of my friends who are sitting here and have come to event after event, and I've heard about this book far too many times. But I really want to thank the families of these nurses and patients, and I'm going to ask you to stand up. Bunny and George and the Meadows family. James Wigan. Two days ago when the book came out, I got an email from somebody named Lula Allen who told me that her aunt was a nurse at TVU, so please stand up. Leah Bennett and her mother, Fermin Jennings, who went after him. Forrest Ballard, whose mother Edna, Virginia's aunt. Richard Reen, whose mother also worked at CWCB. Mia and Lisa Gillespie, whose grandmother was Baby and Nydia dos Santos, whose mother was one of the first child laborers. Virginia Allen. Woo!
Good.
Wow, can we do it? Well, there's just two people who unfortunately passed before the book, Amy Daniels and Elizabeth Slayer. You know, the friend and so this book couldn't have happened without you, and thank you. It belongs to all of you in this community. Thank you. And I'm sorry if I forgot anybody.
And with that, we've been into the audience Q&A. Any questions or anything? I'm sorry.
Hi. Thank you all. The panel was awesome, and really, really appreciate this. I'm proud daughter of a Black angel, my mama Curly, and the only Black Bellevue graduate there too. We were fortunate. Mama didn't catch TB. I'm curious, how did, and anyone who can answer this, they get past this horrific uncommunicable disease and not catch it? Were you able to find out who were not affected versus who were? Were there more?
So tuberculosis is a wily microbe. It's kind of mysterious. I spent a long time speaking with doctors who work in infectious disease, particularly with tuberculosis. And the body, when the microbe enters you, the body fights to contain it in this little kind of the ball. And all of the nurses had latent tuberculosis. What makes it active depends upon different factors. I was never able to get exact counts, again, because nobody kept records of how many nurses actually died of tuberculosis versus how many were sick and got over it. But it seems from my research that most of these women lived very, very long lives, well into their 90s. So whatever they were doing, whatever precautions they were taking, worked. I'm sorry I can't give you a more broad-based answer, statistically speaking, but it worked. Whatever they did worked. Yeah, first.
We've got just a question in the back first, and then Forrest, we'll get the mic to you. Yeah.
Thanks. Hi, everyone. My name's Robin. I'm a global citizen who gives a shit, and I'm an NTB activist. Maria, you could have launched this book at any time during the year, but you launched it the week of the United Nations General Assembly taking place and the high-level meeting on tuberculosis happening for the first time in 5 years. So it's a big political moment for TB. I'd like to know if that was by intention and design. We had the opportunity to meet and engage throughout the week of the high-level meeting. And I also want to know, having launched it this week and had those opportunities to engage with advocates and people affected by TB from literally all over the world, how has that left an impression on you? How is that going to maybe change things as to if you would have just launched it at another time during the year? And then my last thing to everyone in this room would be, I have to say this because I'm an advocate, if and when you're done reading The Black Angels and you feel moved and called to action, take some sort of policy-related action to help end TB globally. It's still the leading infectious disease killer in the world. There's a local advocacy group right here in the US called We Are TB, and they'll be able to help direct you to take action at a national level or a global level, whatever you prefer.
So I wish I could say that I had anything to do with it. It just happened, the stars aligned, and it came out on that day. And when I saw that the meeting was taking place, I thought, oh my goodness, I won the lottery. The date was set many, many, many months before, probably almost a year before. I didn't choose it. The publishing company chose this date. So that was a serendipitous moment. As Robin said, I had the pleasure of being on a number of panels this week with 3 other people, one of them who was John Green, a big young adult author who's become a big voice in tuberculosis, and hearing these stories from people that live in countries where tuberculosis is rampant, where it kills millions of people a year, was harrowing. And I knew this from researching the book, but to sit next to the lived experience, strikes you differently. And I think, if I can use this book to make a change in the world, I want to. As Robin said, everybody in this community was affected by tuberculosis in some capacity by virtue of having CVU. So if you feel so moved, go and advocate for policy change so people can have access to affordable drugs, because it's not just TB drugs, it's all drugs. TB is curable. People shouldn't be sick just because they can't afford drugs, and this is right down the line. So, nobody should suffer with this type of a disease. So please, if you can use your voice and get mad.
And before we take the next question, I just want to just put your hand up if you have a question, and Jabby will bring the mic to you. Thank you, Jed. Go ahead, Brian.
I'd just like to say good afternoon to everyone. I'd like to thank Maria and everybody on the dais. In question to that young lady about catching tuberculosis, I'm 81 years old. My mother worked there every day for 30-some odd years, never caught tuberculosis. Okay, we always had the tuberculosis test, and it was always negative. Thank you.
Should put your hand up if you have a question.
She's standing here, though. She's standing here. Yeah.
That was
Tell it.
Good afternoon. My name is Wanda Chambers. My husband Henry is over there. We have been friends with Miss Virginia since 218. And I just came to thank her for all she does. And we do not call our elders by their first name. We give them respect. We put Miss, Mrs., or something in front of their name. And I just want to educate you.
and how to do something. There.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Sarah Bloss. I'm a local community organizer and Staten Island resident here. I wanted to just say two very quick things. One is a thank you to Miss Virginia Allen, not just for all of the things that you have done, but the things that you are currently doing. And I know that's an entirely different panel on your modern day activism. You are certainly an inspiration to me and many, many, many of my friends here on Staten Island. My question is really pointing back to something that Dr. Debbie Paige said. And it was that history is written through a male white perspective. And given that spaces like this are so rare and so valuable, what can parents, caregivers, and everyday average community members do to preserve stories like this and to preserve Black history?
So I'm working on the doctor. I hope to get there next year. But with that said, I think that it's important for parents to ask for the information. My parents didn't know to ask. So our school didn't really offer it in that way. Those students at my school, my colleague and co-president, her parents knew, and so she grew up with a different understanding of Staten Island's African-American history than I did. So my thought and my charge to everyone is to ask for it.
And when we all band together and ask for it, they will deliver.
Hi, my name is India. I just want to ask the student like that.
It's Nubia. I just wanted to thank you and all the other nurses at CVU. My mother died at CVU Hospital from tuberculosis. That was not one of the things we thought she had at the time when she was placed there, but at the end, that's what she passed from. And what I do remember is that there were a slew of nurses that took care of my mother. And most of those nurses were African-American nurses. And they definitely went out of their way to make her as comfortable as she possibly can during that a year's time that she was there. So I want again, thank you and all the rest of the families who were responsible for this horrible disease that they still don't through cure.
Giving gratitude to all the ladies that come here today, and giving gratitude to all the ladies that are here today, and to all the people that come before me. I give gratitude and honor. I would like to know, how did this experience change the treatment or the viewing of Black nurses after everything was done? How did it really make them feel on a day-to-day basis? Was their lives improved? Were they really looked at as a great beneficial asset to society from that point out? Having my grandmother influence even my own mother to have a lifelong career in the healthcare system, I wonder, how did that pave that way?
I would say, I'd like to answer that question. It gave the nurses who came here to Seaview Hospital an opportunity to make a living wage and to take care of their families properly, sent their children to school, and they were able to buy houses here on the Staten Island, my aunt being one of the first, and Missouri Walker, and of course Lucille's mother, Hazel Pedro. So it gave them a chance to have a better life. And I too benefited from it because I went to school through the Department of Hospitals. Had it not been for that program, I probably would not be sitting here talking to you today.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, and I want to, my name is Lucille Herring, and I'm the daughter of Hazel Pedro Herring. And I want to thank Virginia for telling the story, because many of the questions that you asked, I'm living proof of part of that. My mother rode the 110 bus, and my sister and I would be waiting for her to come off the bus, and she would say, "Don't touch me." She had a special place where she kept her uniforms and her shoes before she entered the house, okay? And she believed in hand washing. I am a nurse epidemiologist and infection control, and my mother, this is it. Why? Because my mother was the foundation. And out of that, I became president of Greater New York Association for Practitioners in Infection Control and Epidemiology. and studied at the Centers for Disease Control. So we professionalized it. And I realized as Virginia started talking about her story, I said, oh, wow, this is it, you know. So I've done over 50 years of nursing. And I'm glad Virginia was able to personalize the story, but we're still living and we're growing. I want my people, my union members, because we're all part of NYSNA, nurse, right, infection control nurses. And if you look at APEC Greater New York, it's a great chapter of APEC, of Association for Practitioners in Infection Control and Epidemiology. And a lot of us are minority nurses. So we're the growing up of this whole thing. And we fought AIDS when I was doing active. That's what my big thing was. And other things now with COVID and everything else. So thank you.
Lucille, would you please pass the mic to Patricia King? Patricia, have a few words, please.
Thank you, Miss Allen. So I met Virginia in 1986. I was a nurse. I just started at Staten Island University Hospital in the operating room, and Virginia precepted me. She taught me how to scrub. And we worked together a lot of years in that operating room, right, Virginia? Yes. And she never shared this story with me. You know, and if you know Virginia, I mean, that kind of humility of what she had been through. But one thing, so right now, I'm the executive director of the New York State Nurses Association. And I'm honored to be here with several of our board members, our president, Nancy Hagans, who's also a Staten Island resident, and our first vice president, Judith Cutchin. Nancy works at Maimonides, and Judith at Woodhull, part of the New York City public health system. But Virginia is one of the people that really got me started in activism. And she would say, you know, my dear, if you want to change things, right, my dear, you know, you must get involved. And if you don't like something that's happening in the profession or in the hospital, my dear, you must use your voice. So Virginia taught me a lot more than how to scrub. And she's one of the people I wouldn't be standing here today and be doing what I do if it wasn't for Miss Allen. So we're really grateful to you. And like I said, the whole time I worked with her, she did not share this story with me. I think it was the first time Matt Titone was honoring you up in Albany. I was like, Virginia, what gives? You know, maybe you wanted to share that. But again, I think that's just, you know, the grace with which she moves through the world and the humility and the honor that she brings to all of us in this community and to our profession. So, you know, here's nurses salute you, Miss Allen.
Good evening. One of the Korean way, one on Pacific fucking head.
Yeah, I'd like to make a couple more little remarks, please. I have friends here from Cleveland and Michigan and Washington. And Norma, I'd like you to say a few words, please. And my friends, I hope they got here from Harlem. Lana Turner.
Go ahead.
I want to concur. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Pat Wilson, and my grandmother was Nellie Holmes. She came from Florida because she was encouraged by her friends to become one of the Black nurses. And I want to thank you, Miss Allen. We share a lot. We're both members of NTNW, and I'm grateful for your encouragement. And the things that you said about the Black nurses, and I can think about my grandmother. Whatever she earned, she shared. I'm the oldest of 4 of her grandchildren, and Nana, as we called her, always made sure we had the best of everything. Whenever it was a holiday, Christmas, Easter, I remember we were getting off the elevator one day. It was Easter Sunday. And she reminded us, don't act like you've never been dressed before. Because Nana always dressed from head to toe matching, going to church with a hat on and some gloves. And she made sure on Sundays, whether it was Easter or not, that we had patent leather shoes, we had gloves, we had a little purse. And that's because she shared whatever she earned at Seaview with us to take care of us. When my mother and father were out working, she was there for us. I remember calling her every day after 3 o'clock when I knew she was going to be home, just so she could tell me what happened during the day at Seaview. So I'm grateful to Maria for listening to my story and for Mrs. Allen for making sure that her story got told of all of the Black nurses at Seaview. God bless you all. Bless you.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Norma Rogers Frank. I'm the past president for New Jersey State Nurses Association and currently the president for Chi Phi in New Jersey, Torquay chapter. I met Miss Allen when they did the documentary. And I just want to say thank you, Maria, for telling this story and working so hard. That's the first time I met you also, is at that documentary. And I love nursing history, and it's always hard to find nursing history about Black nurses. And what I've come to find as a nurse leader, as I meet so many in the industry, that there's more of us that have stories to tell, and our stories are not getting out there. So thank you so much, Miss Virginia, for sharing your story repeatedly, and Maria for making sure that our stories and our history gets out there, because it's extremely important, because we are overlooked. And to answer your question, things ain't always right yet. We're still working on it in 2023.
Good evening again. I'm quite sure it's evening by this time. First of all, thank you all for coming out and supporting my friend Maria. Amen. She did a wonderful book. A wonderful book. But I can't leave without, I think my brother is still here. Is he still here? Is George still here? My brother has to speak. He has to speak before he leaves. So I'm going to let him speak to Maria. But her hard work, you'll see in the book. The hard work is in the book. The labor of love is in the book. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, I think she was visited twice by Mazoria in her writing. She was saying things to me that I didn't tell her, but that my aunt was visiting her, if anybody's spiritual here, and she would say things. I said, that's something that she would say. That's something she would say, Maria. So I'm telling you, the book is just it's so well deserved, and I can't stop thanking you for revealing this to the island and to the world. To the world.
She does have something to do that. There's no buts. She's lying with that. And Debbie, George, right in the back, Jackie, and okay.
Do I need the microphone?
Yeah, please.
Yes. Okay. I'm sorry. I'm blind, first of all, but which is a recent event. But when we started that book and first contacted by Maria, I could see. And I don't know, I think I've achieved a blessing now by not being able to see, blind, but now I see. You remember from the song? Yeah. Well, it happened to me. And I praise God for it. But Maria, thank you for telling this story. And particularly, I was raised by Mazoria Lavinia Walker, Meadows Walker. And she still to this day was the most powerful woman I've ever met. And my mother worked at Seaview also. and so did a lot of my family. And the one thing that I learned from all of them, I used to always tell everybody I was raised by nurses, and I was very proud of that. And they made sure that my English was correct. They corrected me on a lot of things. That's who paid for me to learn how to play a piano, nurses. And in the community that I grew up in, which somebody had a question about, that where we were, it was called Westerly, and then ultimately it was called Dog Patch. Okay, but and the reason it was called, it was the area where the nurses all bought houses in that area, but they used to give us little odd jobs, painting, cutting hedges, doing all little odd things as children growing up also. And the one thing I always remember of all those nurses that were at Seaview, and I know if it's probably one I don't know, but a lot of those nurses, they just exuded love, all of them. They always were trying to help somewhere, trying to extend themselves to do something for somebody else. They used to bring patients home. They used to bring children home. And that extended right down to this building, which used to be Willowbrook State School. My cousins worked here, and they also brought children home to in the yard with us growing up. The nurses, one thing, just remember about these nurses, they did extend themselves, but they always reached out and reached back and tried to find somebody else that could benefit from the experiences that they were having. And they always reached back everywhere. And I'm thankful. I'm a product of it myself. I thank God for what they did for me in my life. And Maria, you just touched my heart that you even took the time to actually think about them and put this together, because they deserve the praise.
Yeah, thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Latricia McCleary, and I purchased the book immediately on hold from Amazon because I wanted to make sure I had it. And so I was skimming and skimming and skimming. And I just want to say, Maria, thank you, because as many times as I sat at the foot of the Queen, Virginia, and heard her story and her passion and her love for her work and all, her home is the museum in itself. She never once talked about how difficult it was. The racism, the segregation, she never once highlighted that in the work that she did. And often I would ask her, and she was like, well, I love what I do. And we were able to grow up and buy houses, and we took care of the patients that no one wanted to take care of. But for you to highlight that even though these nurses were women, they were humble, but they were fighting each and every day, not in fighting in the hospital, but fighting in the world, in America. And so I just want to thank you for highlighting that in your book.
There's another class of people that I'm going to take a minute for us to think about, and that's the support staff at Seaview. The Staten Island community, Seaview offered the Staten Island community a place for Black people to work, and nearly all of us, myself included, my husband's family, they all worked at Seaview. Those who cooked, those who cleaned, those who swept, those who did all those things that none of us like to talk about or even remember sometimes. I'd just like to take a minute, and can we just give a big round of applause to the support staff for Seaview. Thank you.
And we just have the final question. Nope.
Hi, my name is Richard Green. My mother began working at Seaview as a nurse in 1939.
I want to thank everybody who's on the dais. My question really is based upon an aspect of the book that I haven't had an opportunity to read yet. But my mother graduated from nursing school at Hampton, what was then Hampton Institute, Hampton University now. And I was surprised to find out that there were hundreds of nurses that were recruited from the nursing schools in the South. I was wondering, could you kind of address if this was spontaneous, if this was an organized effort? How did the effort to go down South and recruit Black nurses, how was that initiated? And what was kind of behind that?
So if I had 5 hours, I could be a very long version of that, but I think I have like 35 seconds being honest over time. The city needed to fill the ranks at CVU because they had two choices: either start to close down the wards and let all of these patients go back into the community and have the death toll rise again. And they had worked really hard to get it down from 10,000 a year to 5,000 a year, people annually dying of tuberculosis. The second thing was to find people to fill the staff. And so they saw that the Great Migration had worked to bring up laborers, and they had this idea to put out a call down south where there were hundreds of unemployed nurses because they couldn't find jobs. They were only allowed to work in Black hospitals, and there were only 200 Black hospitals versus 6,000 white hospitals. And so they put out the call, and it moved down the Mason-Dixon line into the southern states. And for example, in Missouri, saw it on a bulletin board. Edna heard it from a former colleague. Clemmy heard it from Edna. And so it moved through word of mouth. Some of them did go down and recruit to the schools and recruit the nurses. So, and then these women, and that's something that's not actually talked about a lot when you look at the Great Migration, the professional women that came on, teachers and nurses. Yeah. They were educated women who came up north. So that's the very short answer to a very long, nuanced question. I wish I had more time. We can talk more later. But that's kind of how it worked. It was by different ways. It went through church, in church halls, in African-American papers down south, schools, friends, hey, you need a job? CVU's hiring. Come up. They'll pay you. They'll give you housing. They'll pay for your school, which they did. They Harlem Hospital became a pipeline for filling the ranks for many, many years. So I hope that answers your question a little more.
Thank you, Gemma. Thank you, Danny, Paul, Nonex today, and thank you, Amin, for being here with us with this rich discussion. And I'm just inviting us, again, our president and CEO, Janet Spomner, to go the perfect tour.
Can we just get a round of applause again for the panelists? Thank you so much. And thank you, Gabby, for your excellent moderating, and thank you, Jacqueline, for being mic runner. So thank you deeply, everyone, for your questions and this illuminating conversation. And it's just so moving to have so many family members and people involved. I want to thank again Putnam as the publisher of this book and the College of Staten Island for hosting us here. And I'd really like to give special thanks to my team because this was a big program to put on. So thank you again to Gabriella Leone, Riley Edergenoso, Renee Bushell, Emily Mathis Corona, and the entire team at Staten Island Museum. And thank you to Shani Mitchell and Amara Moore for documenting today's event. So we will make the recording available so that others can see it following this event. Thank you once again to Ms. Maria Smilios, Ms. Virginia Allen, Mrs. Debbie Ann Paige, and Ms. Gabriella Leone. So please join us now outside in the atrium. We can continue the conversation. There's some refreshments, and we will have the book signing. Please buy the books through the museum. We earn the proceeds. It helps benefit our programming. So thank you so much for coming today, and enjoy the reception.
So I'm excited to have come because I had no idea this was happening until I happened across the event on Facebook, and I do know Virginia a tiny bit and have admired her, and I knew about this story to some extent. I thought it was great. And then I saw the book had come out, it was in the Times, and I'm like, you know what? This is such good information in specifics and in general. There's been so much bad information out there about Staten Island. I get so sick of us being the butt of jokes and not getting its due. And so there's so many levels of importance to this book and to Virginia Allen's participation and to Staten Island at Seaview. Plus, my daughter just gave birth at Seaview. I've had a lot of experience there for other health issues in the last year, and I could see overall so many good people that have worked there. And then to see the history as Black women and Black women nurses on Staten Island. And then in the last part with the question and answers, listening to the family members give a picture of life here, but then the writer being able to get underneath also what the benefits were for these Black women, but also what they had to persevere and fight against. So it was a very good event, and I'm so glad so many people came. And yes, to more great information about Staten Island. Karen Davis. I live on the North Shore in Staten Island, not too far from the Westerly, where apparently a lot of the Black nurses found homes and built families and lives.
I was like, I thought a few more years ago to a home. I was able to start out in rears. And thinking I went to my church, thinking buddy. Went to Virginia, where they were talked about the Black Angels had him migrating to London. Something that I didn't know anything about. So I was really blessed. Take that book and to hear and learn these things from the reading. Because I think that his aunt was a part of the Black Angels. That's how I became get involved. That's why I didn't do it. Thank you, brothers.
Hi, my name is Sarah Blas, pronoun she and her. I'm a local Staten Island resident and community activist. And I just wanted to say that today was so special. Spaces like this here on Staten Island are very, very rare. To be able to bring so many stories about Black nurses into one space, to welcome the community, to get feedback on not just how far we've come, but where we want to go in equity and healthcare. Not just here on Staten Island, but globally. It's truly, truly remarkable. And it's been a pleasure to be a part of today. And I can't wait to see where this book goes and who else this book activates. And I also just wanted to shout out Miss Virginia Allen. Thank you so much for all of your work, past and present, and all you plan on doing. You're such an inspiration.
I'm absolutely thrilled to be here, and I'm looking forward to get my book signed by the remarkable Miss Virginia Allen and the author. And I feel with so many wonderful people in existence, I want everybody in this room to sign my book. It's a beautiful, beautiful exhibit. Thank you. Gail Middleton.
It was great to be part of this event. Very mind-blowing and great to hear the history, finally putting it on paper. Hopefully we can continue this for a long time in these conversations.
Beautiful. And I'm an old friend of Maria's, and I'm just incredibly proud of her. And she worked so hard and for so long on this book. And to actually get to see Miss Virginia Allen speak, she's so eloquent and gracious. And I'm just kind of in awe of her and all the nurses. It was just a beautiful day. My name is Allison Wall.
And I'm Paul Johnson.
Good afternoon. My name is Renee Bushell. I'm the Director of Operations for the Staten Island Museum. And it's a pleasure for me to share this day with my colleague, Susan Hogan, our Manager of Education.
Well, it was very exciting this morning getting ready for the event, but I think as the people started to come in and share some of their stories on how they were connected to the book, that was really heartwarming. It was really great to meet a lot of people today, and there was a lot of excitement in the corridor out here, as I'm sure there was in the event.
What a great afternoon it is today, and to be able to tell this important part of Staten Island's history is really significant part of local and city history. And we get to celebrate Virginia because she absolutely deserves it for all of that incredible work that she and her colleagues did. and to celebrate Maria's accomplishments as well. So I'm thrilled to be here with everybody, my colleagues, the community, really marking this occasion. So thank you so much.
My name is Forrest Ballard. I'm just here today getting the Black Angels book. My mother, Edna Sutton Ballard, was one of the original Black Angels in Staten Island. And it's such an awesome day to see all these lovely people. And I can't forget Mrs. Virginia Allen, my first cousin. She was very instrumental in doing the book. And I just want to thank everybody, and everybody come out and get a book.
Perfect. Would you like to say anything?
Well, I'm here today as a nurse in support of my friend Virginia Allen, who has been really instrumental in this book coming and the story of the Black nurses who came being told and presented to the world. So I thank her, and I thank the author of the book, Maria, for all that they have done to let people know about what we do as nurses and as Black people. Thank you.
I've been looking forward to this event from the moment I saw the advertisement 2 or 3 months ago. I was probably one of the first people to sign up for it. And why am I so excited? I don't have any personal connection to the Black Angels or the work they did, but it was very important to me to come to this event that's celebrating an important part of Black history that's not known, that's sort of being uncovered and discovered by the world for the first time. I felt it was a moment of and in history, and I wanted to be a part of it.
My name is Richard Green, and I'm here because my mother was one of the Black Angels. She graduated in 1939 from Hampton Institute, and her first job after graduation was in Staten Island. So she worked here for a couple of years. And the most ironic thing about this is that I didn't realize the risk that she took until I was contacted by the author of the book, who let me know about the existence of what became known as the Black Angels. So all of this is recent current history to me. I knew she worked at Seaview. I knew, what her life was like. She was still single at that point in time, had not married my father. But anyway, this has been a real revelation for me, and it's a real pleasure and point of pride to find out that my mother was a heroine. So thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
Good afternoon. My name is Wanda Chambers. My company is Once Upon a Hat. And I met Miss Virginia at one of the sororities shows or events. And we just all had on red, my favorite color. And she's been a friend since 2018. And she's one of my hat customers. And we have gone places and done things together. And the latest thing that we did is Staten Island Mode. And I'm one of the featured portraits, life-size portrait in the gallery, and I'm still alive. You don't usually get that until after you pass. Miss Virginia was somewhere in the world and could not take a photo, but she blessed me by putting one of my hats in the exhibit. And I will be doing a demonstration and a lecture October 22nd at the Newhouse Gallery in Snug Harbor. And it's a blessing to just be anywhere. And I thank you so much. And I just love Miss Virginia.
I'm very grateful to have my grandmother have been such an inspiration to me and my mom and to so many people throughout the world, as I see. And it gives me great motivation to live in her footsteps and to keep those great lessons that she taught me and bring them life and pass them down to the future generations. Thank you. Yes, I am Purple, the grandson of Virginia Allen. And this is my daughter, Gabrielle.
Hi. Gabrielle, would you like to talk about how your event was today?
Okay. It was fun, kind of tiring to
sit for like a while, but like it was interesting to learn about like where I come from and like my grandma.
I was just about to ask you, like, any thoughts on your family history and finding out about it?
It was fun. I like my, yeah. I'm sorry, I stuttered. I like my family. They're fun.
Would you like to do a shout out?
Okay. I love her. Shout out to her. I love her.
You mind saying and spelling your name?
Yeah. Gabrielle Anthony.
Hi, my name is Sheila Cofield, and I thought this was a very historical event. Virginia Allen is my sorority sister. I'm a member of Lambda Kappa Mu Sorority Incorporated, and we are very proud of her. She is my mentor, my mom away from my mom, and I was very humbled and awed when I heard about her story. And it takes a very special person to give up themselves and to take care of other people, especially when they are suffering from an incurable disease that no one else wants to bother to take care of them. And I think that speaks volumes. And I have learned so much from Virginia. And I try to do that in my field that I work in. I work with special needs children. And so I think today what I've also learned as we as Black women are caregivers, and we do tend to do that. We give of ourselves, sometimes at the expense of ourselves, so to speak. So I do think this was a worthwhile project, and I do hope everyone will go out and purchase this book and pass it along to other generations. Thank you.
Yeah, do you mind saying and spelling your name correct?
Sheila Cofield, COF as in Frank, IELD.